Pregnancy is a natural process, so if it's not happening or if it's not sticking, something is missing. After having a family member go through infertility and experiencing a miscarriage myself, I realized how little support and education women have around infertility. I want to change that. I'm Dr. Jane Levesque. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a natural fertility expert. Tune in every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for insightful case studies, expert interviews, and practical tips on how you can optimize fertility naturally. If you've been struggling with infertility, pregnancy loss, women's health issues, or you just want to be proactive and prepare yourself for the next big chapter in your life, this show is for you. Hi, Allison. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to connect. Thank you for reaching out.
Dr. Jane, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell us how you got into the space, constipation, digestion, acid reflux. Give us a little bit of a backstory, and then we have some exciting things we want to talk about that I think most people are unaware of around copper and fertility and all the other health issues that it can cause. But I just want people to get to know you a little bit first.
Of course. So back in 2015, I developed my own set of health issues. Very common opening story. My health issues, I always like to say they were called because, the doctors give us names for things, but then we end up finding out later, like I didn't have IBS, I had a parasite. I didn't have constipation, I had low stomach acid. That being said, they called it IBS with a constipation leaning. It was really horrible. Nothing worked. That I was like the perfect patient. I did perfect compliance, though I was definitely suggested to me on several occasions that my failure to improve was lack of compliance. But, did the low FODMAP diet, was gluten-free, dairy-free, ate lots of fiber, drank water, made my own kombucha, did probiotics, tried every probiotic anybody recommended to me, thinking that must be it. That must be
this is the one. After a while, that gets old, right? You're like, I don't know if it is, but I'm going to try. And then after a while, you're like, no, I'm just done.
Yeah. And spent about 2 years. In that 2-year time period, I started losing hair. So if you look back at my pictures back then, I cut off all my long hair because it was getting so thin. It looked really bad. I lost my period. I had no period for about 2 years. And after several rounds of medications failed to start my period, my gynecologist and my GI doc at the University of Michigan, so like people who think they're really fancy, both said, it's your stress. You need to quit your job. Now, I worked at a nonprofit. I was right out of college and I thought, well, I guess I should quit. So I quit and did a different job. Now, no job is without stressors, but I just thought, I'll change up what I'm doing here.
Sure.
And of course, nothing helped. And so after that point, I basically accidentally fell into and got exposed to the things that ended up healing me. And as I found those things, I started having this thought of like, what a shame I can't learn how to do this for other people. And then I actually learned, no, there's ways that I can learn to do these things. There's places I can get education. There's ways. Yep. And so basically from 2017 on was just a matter of gaining education, becoming a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, just getting lots of experience working one-on-one with clients, coming in with a lot of humility because I didn't come in as like a doctor, right? It wasn't like I have all the answers. I'm like, I don't have any answers because I worked with all the mystery cases, but then I started solving those mystery cases. You start to see the patterns and then you're like, we need to start a podcast or something to tell people about what people aren't being talking about.
For sure. So, what were some things that because you said as you started to get out of it and you stumbled upon some things that worked, what were those things?
Very first thing was craniosacral therapy and visceral manipulation. So manual therapies in the osteopathic tradition, hands-on treatment. And it was super random because I went to a pelvic floor therapist within the University of Michigan, and that is not normal, like PT or pelvic floor therapy training. She just happened to have recently taken the first level of both of these 4 modalities. She just happened to, and she like did all her pelvic floor testing, the balloon treatment and testing. And she's like, okay, you check out, you're perfectly fine. Your muscles work, your breathing works, your poop works, at least the muscles for pooping. And she's like, I'm just going to try these new modalities I happen to have. And I know this story because she and I are friends now and we've like attended seminars together. Right? So that was the first thing. And I remember thinking, once I learned those modalities, because I then became a massage therapist and did these modalities, I thought, was I the fluke? was I like the freak accident that these two things helped my GI conditions, or is this applicable to more people?
And it was like actually her just going in and like manipulating your intestines
And
then
the nervous system. So spinal cord, cranial bones, helping the whole central nervous system talk to the peripheral and the enteric nervous system and vice versa.
Yeah.
Releasing adhesions, visceral adhesions around organs so that the organs can rotate and move so that you get that better motility and peristalsis. And that was just like, that was probably, I would give it a 25% minimum improvement. So it was very notable. I was curious if I just maintain this long enough, I'll heal, and I didn't. And that's when I started stumbling across other things. But it was such a notable improvement. I thought my life was like,
what was the next
thing?
thing?
I hit the jackpot. The next thing was when I did my functional diagnostic nutrition training, they force you to do your labs that you're learning how to analyze on yourself. And I was very haughty at this point. At this point, I'm like, guys, I'm so much better than I used to be. Everything's great. And I get this test back and it's like, you got blastocystis hominis, which is a parasite. It's microscopic. For those of anyone who doesn't know, some parasites come in the invisible form. So don't think worm, think like cell, the size, like very tiny, right?
Yep.
And so had this little guy in me. That's one thing. I also had H. pylori. Another thing. I had low stomach acid. Another thing. Liver was super congested, which I don't know if you use that terminology on your podcast specifically.
Sure, yeah.
But just means that my liver wasn't detoxing at optimal rates by any means. So I just worked on things like helping my liver detox better and getting rid of old crud in it and getting rid of a parasite, all with herbal methodologies. And really just, that was when things switched again. And I had another big wave of healing that I didn't even know was an option.
For sure. Yeah. I use the analogy for the liver as like the toll booth. And so everything has to go through the toll booth. And so you might have only one open, or you might have 5, and you might have 10 cars, you might have 50. And so if you have one toll booth and 50 cars, it's going to be slow, right? That's what I'd say congested liver is. It's like, it's just slow. Things are moving. It's very backed up. And you can experience that obviously as constipation, while some other people experience that as diarrhea, right? Or skin, or like acne, eczema, psoriasis, that kind of stuff. But the liver is the king, if you will.
I mean, it's amazing how many problems you can fix just by supporting the liver. But you also want to know where's the traffic coming from. And so you want to tackle from both ends. But that's hilarious. I love that analogy.
So what I'm hearing, because I'm a big proponent of right therapy, right person, right time. And I love that it wasn't just one thing that quote unquote fixed you, because I find that's actually very, very rare, where you just go to a visceral massage or osteocraniosacral and then it's like magic and everything works. I find it is more of that 20-25%. But what I love is that you didn't just give up and then there was like, what's the next layer? Because even if I can talk to you about copper and like, how do you know about copper? What do you know about copper? Why is it important?
Oh, I love this. So copper was, again, one of those things that both as a practitioner and as a self-healer, you just aren't thinking about.
Never. Like, I've been in practice for 10 years and this is the first year where I'm like, this is important, isn't it? And now, like, that's all I test all the time. All my women, I'm like, you need to know what your copper, and I mean for men as well.
It's typically like a light switch. I find that practitioners that understand just enough, you just like smacks you in the face like a rock, and you start to realize, because I'm guessing, did you do I don't know what type of testing you do primarily for copper. I rely on the HTMA test for the most part. Is that
no? I do blood.
You do blood.
I do blood.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't, to be honest, from my mentor, Dr. Leah Hetchman, she doesn't do a lot of the hair because there isn't enough research for her to see. And then it's like, it's too late in the fertility world anyways. It's too late to see because it's what happened 3 months. And like, she needs to know now. So we do blood.
And there's validity. That's why I kind of asked there. I think there's pros and cons. I'm not saying HTMA is the end all be all, but that's what I was already running that test with clients when I knew, because I got trained in the HTMA, I knew about copper toxicity, but it'd be really interesting when clients came in, I still had this worldview of still thinking in terms of what pathogen do you have, what toxin do you have, maybe even what heavy metal, but copper is inherently not a heavy metal. It's actually a healthy mineral, right? Which is why it's kind of shocking to people to be like, No, isn't copper good for you? It's in prenatals.
Yep.
It's in food we eat. And what happened is that I had a couple clients who we made really good progress. We're killing pathogens, we're making good progress, and then you kind of plateau. And my thing I always do is I just go back and say, what data do we already have? What do we know? And how can we associate your symptomology with the data that we have? And I found with those few clients, oh, you got this copper thing that I learned about. And it actually correlates with this acid reflux you're getting, because copper can cause histamine problems, and histamine problems can cause acid reflux. Or this copper issue correlates with your anxiety and your insomnia issues, because copper can cause, it's an excitatory mineral. So if you have a lot built up in your system, and it actually tends to get stored in your neural tissue, right, you're going to have a lot of neurological symptoms potentially as well. So lots of anxiety, lots of insomnia or nightmares,
Migraines,
sleep, fatigue. Yeah, you said migraines, which I haven't seen as much of, like, specifically with that, but it's kind of like once you see it, you don't unsee it. So now once clients come in and they say, and I have anxiety, and I have PMS, and I can't get pregnant, you're like, we really need to see what your copper levels look like in our testing.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I've been learning from my mentor and I started running. So when I run the index, like I'm looking at the copper and zinc ratio, I'm looking at the free copper percentage and then the ceruloplasmin levels, because that's
Yes.
obviously, right, that big connection.
Yes.
And the ceruloplasmin to the immune system. So for those of you who are like nerds on figuring out the root cause, which obviously like we're those nerds, what I'm finding, and Allison, I'd love to hear what you're finding, is that it's like there's layers to the root cause, because you could say, oh, it's this copper that's causing the issue, but it's also like, well, what's happening with the other minerals? And then why is the zinc low, or why is the ceruloplasmin low? And then there's something going on with the immune system. And then the immune system is basically your gut microbiome, which is, going to transfer across the entire body. And then the gut microbiome is probably getting impacted by the environmental toxins. So I still find that the microbiome is essentially at the root cause of all issues, but what's impacting that microbiome is going to be different for everyone. That's kind of the conclusion that I have come to so far, but that might change when I learn more.
I mean, and the thing is, we're always like changing how we're perceiving our mental models for how we're seeing the body. And you use that model until some client breaks the bank. You're like, the mental model isn't working, or whatever it is, until you see a new pattern. I love that. Yeah. I mean, you bring up zinc. Zinc has a huge role. You can actually have almost normal levels of copper, but if you're zinc depleted, which is a really big problem with my client base, my client load,
Huge. Everybody.
I know. I'm like, it's a little bit like, feels like it's everyone. A client recently told me, should you just take zinc as like just something everyone should be taking the rest of their life? I'm like, I can't say that for sure, but it seems with my client load that there's so many ways for us to get depleted in zinc. And here's the catch-22 with zinc is that it's a part of creating stomach acid. You actually have to have zinc to create stomach acid, but you also need stomach acid to absorb zinc. So if you've ever been put on a PPI, if you've ever had H. pylori, that then will lower your stomach acid levels. If you have anything that interrupts your stomach acid levels for long enough, then you are going to now become zinc depleted. Once you're zinc depleted, you set yourself up to more easily become copper imbalanced, because zinc and copper balance each other. So it's almost, I mean, you could have almost normal levels of copper, but if your zinc's out of whack, you're still going to get some copper toxicity symptoms.
Yeah, it's crazy how the body works. What I mean by that is like, if you're spiraling down, because it's like if you start taking the PPI, now you're not absorbing. It's not just zinc, right? Like it's your proteins, it's B12s, like it basically everything is going down. And then it's hard to like, you get the heavy stomach, you're not digesting things. And so it's just like this really negative spiral. But then the opposite is also true. Because then, okay, you get some zinc in there and then all of a sudden your stomach acid goes up, your immune system is functioning better. So then it can overcome the infections easier, the H. pylori, the parasites, the bacterial, viral infections, whatever it is. And so it starts to spiral up as well.
If you're talking about root cause, and something I really like to caution anytime I'm talking with somebody about copper and especially zinc and stomach acid, that if you're increasing zinc, I usually don't see a great absorption until we know that stomach acid levels are getting to appropriate levels. But I personally am never giving someone stomach acid until I know whether or not H. pylori is there. H. pylori is in about 35% of the American population, but in developing countries, it's as high as 80%. So
Crazy.
yeah, I've had clients who we can actually trace their, I'm always very interested in, can we trace your health history to look at what were key significant factors? Because no one comes to me with one issue, right? It's 4 issues, it's 5, it's 10. But when did they pick up each issue? Was it childhood? Was it in utero? And I have one client who her symptoms really skyrocketed after her husband took a business trip to Mexico. He came back not feeling so great and getting acid reflux. Well, now she has acid reflux, but also all these other issues like PMS and acne and eczema. And she ended up developing gastroparesis, which is its own whole story. But we could not safely up her zinc or even effectively up her zinc until we could up her stomach acid, and we couldn't safely up her stomach acid until her stomach could actually handle the acid, both on a visceral level, like visceral adhesions, which she had a car accident. So she couldn't actually, she had all these adhesions keeping her stomach from functioning properly and managing its own stomach acid. And then she also had the H. pylori. So just to say, if someone's listening to this, it's not always the best idea to just start throwing zinc at yourself. You might not absorb it. Or it's not always the best idea to just say, I'm going to give myself some betaine HCl and zinc. You also might feel worse.
Yeah, right person, right therapy, right time. And that's, I'm always very cautious when people are like, should just everyone do this? Should just everyone do ubiquinol for pregnancy? And I'm like, in theory, yes, but can you absorb it? Like, what other nutrients are you taking? What's the gut function? There's a lot more to it. In theory, yes, it's a fantastic, but you have to keep everything else in mind. There's 2 things that came to mind though when you were talking about this case. Is number one, like, this is why we need to treat males. You always treat couples because it's microbial transference, right? Even when I have a couple people who reach out to me who are not fertility, and I'm like, I will take you on if it's X, Y, and Z issues. So like hormonal, because it's basically all the same anyways, just the end goal is I want to thrive instead of I want to have a baby. Your partner has to be on board. He's like, but he doesn't really have stuff. He has lots of stuff. He just doesn't know it, and you don't know it. And you're probably are right, just transferring that back and forth. I can't treat H. pylori in one person or treat yeast or parasites in one person and assume that the other, like I've had patients who had to have their dogs treated at the same time as them because it's like, you guys are just, that's the home, the microbiome, right? The microbiome of the home. And that parasite is in every single aspect of the microbiome. We need to get it out from everybody.
Yeah, I love that. Yes. My clients definitely are a little shocked when I kind of wait till they see the evidence and I'm like, okay, H. pylori gets passed via spit.
Yep, totally. Yep.
He has to do this. And it's really interesting. They'll either be like, oh my gosh, my husband, he has like all these symptoms. It like totally matches up. Or they'll be like, my husband has no symptoms. I'm like, well, his immune system might be handling it really well, but that doesn't mean that we're going to take any chances with him not doing this protocol.
Well, yeah, I actually see that all the time where the woman is the one that's struggling and he is quote unquote fine, but he's the one that's the carrier, you know, and it's like she's getting reinfected all the time. So anytime, I mean, I do vaginal microbiomes, STI, STD, obviously, like anyone pops up on anything, people are both being treated. It's not a and if or but, you know, otherwise it just doesn't work. It's like, do you want to spend hundreds of dollars worth of supplements and then not have it work?
And that's what's so sad is people are doing that. Sometimes because
because
they're DIYing stuff. Sometimes because their practitioners are either ignorant or like afraid. Like, well, if I say that they have to double the amount of work they're doing, they won't work with me or whatever it is. But we have to deal with the truth, even if it's ugly, if we want the results we want. So I always love it when I meet practitioners like you who we're having to share the hard truth, but it gets results.
Yeah. And I bring up the other practitioners too. Like if there's lots of practitioners who follow me and it's like, listen, it's hard to tell the wives to tell that the husband also needs to be, it's not easy, but I don't want to feed into the cycle of pretending that I can solve her problem without him being involved, even if quote unquote, everything is fine on his side. Like it's just not how it works.
Yeah, I love this.
You know,
can we talk about the sources of copper?
Can you, one more thing that came up that we didn't finish, and then let's talk about copper because there's a lot more about it. The gastroparesis, I have had a couple patients and sometimes it's male, sometimes it's female. and their conventional system is just like, it's genetic. What are your thoughts?
I love that.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, now it is what they're
Except maybe
told.
take some things to speed up right? Like laxative or.
Yeah, that's what they're told. So, my
And what
client
is the
came to
truth,
me.
Allison? Tell us the truth.
I would say I wish I had more gastroparesis cases under
Yep.
my belt to give at least to say, here's the patterns I'm seeing.
Mhm.
I have one. And I don't know if that's just I'm not hitting the right population. I can tell you I learned a ton from that case, and I would bet tons of money like that what I learned, even if I don't need every step for a bunch of other gastroparesis clients, I bet that these are things that other clients are dealing with. And when I was working with her, I was doing lots of research, and some people classify it as an autoimmune condition. Some people,
Yep.
so there's lots of different stuff. Like, who cares if it's genetic? It doesn't mean it's irreversible. Like, autoimmune conditions can be genetic and you can put them into remission. It just means that part of their body likes to go haywire in that specific way. Just like some clients, when they have an issue, they're going to get constipated. That's me. Some clients, when they have an issue, they're going to get a migraine. I like to call it the Achilles heel. So
Yep.
I usually don't see it in any black and white, like, oh, you're a goner.
Totally.
It's really, we want to be more curious. And so when this client came to me, I did a physical evaluation, since that was my background in training, is we're always pairing lab work and biochemical, like listening for how the cells are functioning, with the physical, so the structural, how the body was working. And I did a quick evaluation of her, and it was like all these restrictions on her left side, and the stomach's primarily on the left side. I'm like, what happened to your left side? She's like, well, 6 months ago I got in this car accident. And she was on a motorcycle and got flung off the motorcycle and landed on her left side. She had frozen shoulder on her left side, which she didn't even put in her intake form, because she's like, well, I'm here for gut health stuff. And I'm like, of course you are.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
gastroparesis.
Right. Yes.
But her doctor had said, you're lucky. Her GI doc at the University of Michigan, you're lucky your gastroparesis is only 10% of what other people's gastroparesis is. She's like, how is this lucky? I'm on 3 PPIs a day, 1 in the morning, 2 at night, because it's worse at night. I sleep on a wedge. I can't eat anything. I'm losing weight. I'm a skeleton. Like, how is
You're
this
lucky. Yeah.
How are other people in a better position? And so she was hoarse. So this was another really interesting part of her case. And I know that this is not true for all gastroparesis clients, but she was chronically hoarse. And so it hurt to talk. And she was basically depressed because she couldn't socially connect with people. And I didn't know that coming in either. But it was only in that first session, I'm like, look, we're going to run some lab tests. We're going to see, like, I want to know if you have H. pylori. I just want to know everything. But we did just some visceral manipulation releases, her lung pleura. So anatomy, guys, we're going to go deep. If you want to know this, Dr. Jane, tell me if you don't.
I do. Yeah.
Her lung pleura had adhesed to her rib cage, right? So like the musculature of her rib cage. And so her lung pleura on the left side couldn't drop and it couldn't lift. So you know what? Her arm couldn't lift because you have fascia that transitions up into the shoulder, the left shoulder. And then also it goes down into the left
And that's why she
abdomen.
had the frozen shoulder.
So she had the frozen shoulder, and the gastroparesis were like, she was bound on the left side, right? She couldn't move.
Yep.
I mean, she could, not well, but she said she'd already gotten, it was like, when I saw her, it was gobs of PT, because it must have been about 6 months of PT, and had no improvement. And the PT said, you just need to do these exercises the rest of your life if you ever want to have any progress, of which she was having none. She had tons of neck pain, of course. Like, they're like, oh, it's the car accident. But nobody thought, well, the gastroparesis started about 3 months after the car accident. Nobody thought it might be the car accident that caused the gastroparesis or was a component of it. However, let me just say, craniosacral therapy and visceral manipulation, while her frozen shoulder was gone in about 4 sessions, she could wash her hair again. She could get a mug out of the cabinet. She was off of that 3rd PPI also in about the same amount of time. We had to do a lot of work on everything else. She did have H. pylori. It took a very long time for us to be able to safely give her betaine HCl, though, and we knew her zinc was low. I mean, it's just abysmal, because there was just something going on, and we ended up discovering that it was actually mostly psychological. It took us about 2 years of really refining her microbiome. She was eating more, she was gaining weight, lots of things were good, but we just couldn't get her off that last PPI. She eventually was just on 1 a day, and then eventually 1 every other day. And I said, well, let's try something different. And I had actually, her whole time we were working together, I said, is there any chance that there's an emotional component to it? Like, do you see that, Like, do you feel stressed in your job, or do you feel whatever? And she admitted that she felt depressed when she couldn't talk. Her hoarseness went away so she could talk normally again. All of that improved. Her neck pain went away. And she's like, no, there's no emotional component. Well, after about 2 years, when she's doing the best she's done in like 10 years, she says her sister comes to visit, and her entire, like, her acid reflux had been so low. And this was the first time she'd had to go back to 2 PPIs a day. It was when her sister was home. And I was like, and she said, and it took a couple days, and then it went back down after her sister left. And then she went back down to 1 PPI every other day. But she's like, she could feel, and it was the first time she really connected with her body. And I really think this is not a judgment thing. Like, she and I was trying to be very open with me. There was no part of her that I could tell wanted to withhold information. I think she didn't know she had this information
Totally, yeah.
in her body of stressors. And as soon as she saw that, it was like a light bulb went off. And she's like, I want to deal with this emotional component. We decided, through talking through different options, and I think there are a lot of options with dealing with the emotional component of things. We decided to go with DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining System. I'm blanking on the woman who
How does that
created it.
compare with EMDR?
It's really similar. But EMDR, you need a facilitator. This you do on your own.
Okay.
So, of course, it is technically different, but there's overlap. And EMDR is...
Yeah, I mean, you're actually retraining the nervous system and how it responds to trauma and yeah.
on a subconscious level.
Yes.
And so she was working through that, and she had a couple other like events happen, like a coworker chewed her out at one point, and we were tracking her symptoms, and she's like, I can see it now. And we could tell the last vestiges of her symptoms when she would get these acid reflux bumps for no reason. And she'd always say, Allison, could I possibly have H. pylori again? I'm like, look, I'm not really big into just saying, let's do another GI map test. Let's do another round of H. pylori protocol. And that's what people get stuck on, is every time a symptom relapses, they say, I just need to do another parasite protocol. Maybe you do, but maybe it's something that's not on your radar. And maybe that's...
Well, and even if you're redoing it all the time, then the question is like, well, are you really dealing with a parasite?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because it's like the energetics behind the bug is really why they're there. If your body is continuing to welcome them in, you haven't made a shift. And that's the emotional component.
Which is a great topic, and we won't be able to do it justice in this. But for her, that was her last thing. So really, it started with physical release of fascial restrictions. It moved on to more of the biochemical component of things. Some of it was dietary, some of it was, pathogens, toxins, liver, and then the last chunk was emotional. And she right now, no PPIs, eats whatever she wants, gaining weight like a champ, no pain in her body.
Amazing.
And actually, the last thing we found was Lyme. There was an emotional component, and then we discovered Lyme.
I'm not sure there's ever like a last thing. You know what I mean? Just because the body evolves, but it's how you live with it and you change in the interaction. It's because, I've been at this for 10 years. My mentor is at 30 years. And it's like, I don't want to say I'm always working on something, but I'm always discovering and learning. And,
Yes.
but I'm not debilitated. When I first started my journey, it was like, I can't, like, that's fight or flight. Whereas now it's curiosity. Yes. It's learning my body on a deeper level. It's, why are these bugs still here? What are they trying to teach me? What's the energetic component of it? Some of it is generational, like you're not going to overcome that. There is no timeline is what I'm trying to say, but it's right therapy, right person, right time, and having more curiosity as opposed to what's wrong with me,
Yeah. And like in your work, if someone gets pregnant successfully and carries a healthy baby to term, even gets pregnant the second time, third time, it doesn't mean that they never need anything else.
Oh my God. The whole pregnancy will rock you and change you in the way that it needs to. You know what I mean? Like there's pregnant, even when you do all the prep and the whatever, this is where I say it is a journey for you on a soul level. You don't know what the soul is here to teach you. And I think like, deep down, when you're not aware though, you don't. Like you have no idea. That's what happened to me. And the first time I'm like, it's going to be easy. It's going to be fun. And then like I got rocked into it and it was like, oh, okay. I have very little control of what I'm doing here. Like this is, it's not about me anymore. And that's just like the selfless act of being a woman and being a mother is you get to be the vessel,
Yeah.
Let's talk about copper. Thank you. That was a huge sidetrack, but like, that was really beautiful the way you laid it out as well. I don't think that there's one therapy that's going to fix everything. It's very much, I've been talking a lot about like We're just these antennas. And if you're in tune, you can actually know exactly what the next right step is for you and which right practitioner to work with, which right therapy. Because if you're in tune, like your inner wisdom will tell you, this is working, this isn't working, I'm missing something, I need to do more testing. And I really like to educate my patients to, like, if I'm not the practitioner to help you, I don't want you to be showing up on appointments, because it's like, what are we doing here? You know? And my job is to clue in really quickly where it's like, hey, this is an emotional thing. We're going to have to work on this over here. Or this is a physical thing and you need to get some visceral work done, get an osteopath, get a massage therapist, whatever it is, physio, to just get this moving, because there's no amount of supplements that's going to help that. You know, you have to get somebody in there and do the dirty work.
A good practitioner knows when to delegate, and you're looking for those signs of, like, if your goal is to help them get to their goal, it doesn't always mean it's going to be by you every step of the way.
100%. Yeah. I think it's silly to think. I used to think that. I was like, I can do it all. And then it's like, well, I don't know if I can, right? Because, and this is how I've changed that, is because I've met some practitioners. Like, I remember my physio, he's phenomenal at what he does. Like, I mean, it's just crazy. He can look at your spine and like poke at things. You don't even tell him history. He's like, does this hurt? Does this hurt? Does this hurt? And you're like, oh, how do you know me? And he can put those, because he just looks at you and he can see where you're carrying the pain and the tension and how to fix it. I don't have that. I can see that on certain, right? But it's like, there is a time and place for that, you know, and it's beautiful. And so I think you're right. We have to be able to know who to send when, because it can be really powerful for people. Talk to me about copper.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about sources. I'm more curious about, like, sources for sure. I'm more curious about how does it play in infertility, in pregnancy loss, even complications during pregnancy, postpartum, that kind of stuff.
It really honestly links into even like how copper affects hormones and all the rules of hormones, particularly for women who are trying to get pregnant, right? That also links directly into the sources of copper. So I want you to think, you being the listeners, why do copper IUDs exist? Because copper is pro-estrogenic, meaning copper encourages estrogen to hang around. And even if you've never been on a copper implant or copper IUD, if you've been on birth control, if you've been on an IUD that has hormones in it, estrogen is pro-copper. So if you've ever been on synthetic estrogen, and by the way, also consider fragrances, endocrine disrupting things that look like xenoestrogens, meaning false estrogens, that can also encourage copper to hang around, that you're just getting exposed to maybe in food sources, but also potentially water sources, etc. So like pipes, copper piping in a home, or whether it's your city water or your actual home piping, you can get copper from there. But basically, once you have this copper in your body, it now just plays with your hormones, primarily estrogen. But now, so your estrogen can't fall the way it needs to. So you're going to have a hard time having healthy periods. It might play roles in just disrupting, you're having higher levels of inflammation. So it can cause a lot of high histamine. Basically, you're not setting yourself up for anything that's healthy, normal. And I'll give a really great example. I had a client come to me. She was trying to conceive for about a year. She was a history of a marathon running, very fit, very healthy, ate sufficient calories, never had any calorie restriction history, but couldn't get pregnant. She'd actually had no period for about 6 months prior to seeing me. She had been working with conventional medicine system, and they were looking at, is there any way that she, of course she doesn't have a period, but they're also looking at, does she have endometriosis? Does she have PCOS? And she did have some endometriosis. They did a laparoscopy to remove that. She had a uterus that was a little misshapen. They did a surgery to do that to fix it or support improving it, but she still couldn't even have a period. I'm like, look, if you have the perfect body and you don't have a period, this is not going to help. So we look at some stuff. She's got H. pylori. She's not getting nutrients like protein out of her food. She's not getting all these things. We work with all the stuff that I just talked about. We talked about H. pylori and stomach acid and zinc, and she gets her period back. Well, the last thing is she still has this mountain of copper in her body, like a mountain of copper. and we don't know where it came from. She's looking at she's like, I've never been on birth control, blah, blah, blah. We have ideas. We think it must be from childhood. Could have been a childhood house, could have been from her mother herself.
Yep.
It can be passed in utero if the mother had high copper levels for any reason. It could be that the mother was on birth control for a long time. Could be that the mother used copper cookware or had copper cookware used for her when she was a child. But copper can be passed in utero. However this client had it, we wanted to make sure she wasn't getting current exposure to it. So no more oysters for her. She actually didn't eat oysters. But I had one client who had really high copper who ate oysters all the time. Oysters are super high in copper. So sometimes there's a food component. Usually I find if there's not oysters involved, it's usually not food sources of copper, but it doesn't allow your hormones to perform naturally. Imagine trying to get pregnant with a copper IUD in you. You'd be like, well, that sounds difficult. Well, that's what copper toxicity can be. It's like a permanent copper IUD messing up everything.
Yeah. The copper actually gets elevated. So it should be 1-to-1 ratio with zinc for like in a normal cycle. When we as women get pregnant, the shift goes to about 2-to-1. And then as we get further along in the pregnancy, it can go up 3-to-1 and as high as 4-to-1. And the higher it's going, the copper is getting higher, the closer the woman is to labor, essentially. And so you can actually start to see when she's going to go into labor just by tracking those numbers. And so if the woman is walking around with a 2-to-1, it's as if her body thinks that she's pregnant. So that's basically like it just can't get pregnant because it already thinks that.
You had a look in your eyes, and I was like, Dr. Jane is thinking something, and I am not saying
No.
it.
It's because I look at it right in the pregnancy and in the fertility world, not just like neurological disorder. And for copper, so number one, it's that 2-to-1. So that can happen just with a pregnancy and a miscarriage. And so what happens for some women, obviously for this case, that wasn't the point because she couldn't get pregnant. But for some women, they will get pregnant and miscarry, but that copper doesn't go back. And so then they either can't get pregnant or they'll get pregnant, but it will just miscarry again. And that copper just kind of continues to accumulate. And then that becomes an issue. Because even if, like, I have women who have been able to get pregnant with a high copper, I didn't know about it at the time, and then you're looking at, okay, well, they get really sick. The chances of them having intense morning sickness is really, really high. Obviously, the chance of miscarriage is high. The chance of then having complications later in the pregnancy, going into early labor, premature labor, and the neurological symptoms for the baby, whether it's ADHD or autism or all of these behavioral things that we're seeing now. I don't think anything is ever linked to one thing. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, it's not because even with the copper toxicity, there's so much more that's coming. There's usually infections. There's usually some sort of other toxicity, and it's just that copper is out of balance. So we have to help to mitigate that so then we can get rid of the symptoms. But you usually have to work on the root cause, which to me is going to be microbial or environmental toxin of some sort that's screwing it up in the first place.
I did not know that, and I am like dying on the inside. I want to go and like do a bunch of research now. Thank you. I mean, that is so like when my clients are detoxing copper, once we get to that protocol, which is not the first thing we're gonna do by any means. Good Lord, please don't. But once you get to that point, that menstrual cycles can be much more painful because we have the highest amount of copper. I knew about copper elevating in levels in the body as you approach menstruation.
Because estrogen is elevated, right? So those two things go hand in hand. And so it's like you have to understand why the estrogen is there, because if you don't fix the estrogen, the copper will continue to hang out.
I love it. Yeah. So so if the estrogen for a menstruating woman, if the estrogen's leaving at appropriate times, the copper is going to come out. But if copper is detoxing because you're in a protocol, you'll get these like a couple periods that are just really gnarly. I also get clients when they detox copper, they get really bad nightmares. It's one of the most common symptom is they'll be like, I had horrible nightmares 3 days of this week.
That's interesting.
Is that the copper? And I'll be like, that's what every other client detoxing copper says. Not every, but like a bunch. It's a high rate for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I love it. It's new space for me, but I'm definitely looking into it a lot more now. And in the fertility space, it's like you just don't have the luxury of time a lot of the times.
Yes.
So then you have to test more and you have to test more frequently just so then you can see how the body is moving.
Hence the blood work.
For sure.
Which, I mean, and that's a huge benefit with the ceruloplasmin. And you just like hinted at it, but ceruloplasmin and you might have your own way of describing it, but it's made by the adrenal glands. So you really want to have nothing bothering the adrenal glands, everything from caffeine to pathogens or even food
And I mean, it is a
sensitivities, which can
protein. That's
cause.
like the biggest connection that I make to people. And they're like, why do you need to eat protein?
Interesting.
Like, it's a protein. Like ferritin is a protein. LH, FSH, those are all amino acids. They're peptides, right? So if you don't get enough protein and you're like, I don't have any hormones, or I don't have any of this, or my immune system isn't working, it's because like we're literally are made of amino acids and bugs.
Ceruloplasmin, and to throw another one in there, bile, are two big chelators of copper. So sometimes you have high copper because your ceruloplasmin's in the pits because your adrenal glands are in the pits, or maybe you're not eating enough protein in this case.
I never find it's one thing, right?
Right.
It's
It's
usually
never.
multiple. Yeah,
Yes.
it's never one thing.
And
Yeah.
then, same with if your liver's congested, you're not producing sufficient bile, then bile is also a big chelator of copper. And so again, you could almost have normal copper exposure, but if you're not having, if your systems to get rid of it, that not tariff, what did you call it? The
Toll bridge.
bridge.
Toll booth.
If the
It's a toll booth.
If
Yeah.
your toll booth is congested, yeah, that copper is not getting out of there too, just like your poop or whatever.
For sure. Well, yeah. And a lot of the time it's like, oh my God, the cholesterol is elevated. If you just start pooping, the cholesterol goes down because you just get rid of the excess cholesterol, right?
Yeah.
For some people, it could be really simple. Do you have your own story with copper, like measuring it and...
Nothing crazy. Here's the only story I can give you. I'm primarily testing copper, which HTMAs. Occasionally I will double validate or I'll seek deeper information with blood work, but I miscarried. So this is my story. I miscarried my first child end of 2020 and, got a pretty basic, standard, conventional medicine, like, sorry that happened, good luck. We're not going to do anything until you miscarry 3 times. And I'm like, this sucked. I'm not waiting till the third time happens.
No. That was the same as me. I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm doing this a couple more times before you give me any testing.
So I got some advanced blood work done, meaning I knew what blood work I wanted. I told my DO, this is the blood work I want. She was super sympathetic. She's like, I will do whatever you say. You just miscarried. And it had histamine and homocysteine on it. And my histamine was super high and my homocysteine was super low. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look at a couple things. And that helped guide my additional functional testing. Because I'm like, the blood work still doesn't tell me what's wrong necessarily. I still want to, how I find it.
I say blood work tells us what's wrong. It doesn't tell us why
That's
it's
what
wrong.
I say. Yes. I was like, I wanted to say it and I didn't want to like cause problems if you like totally just.
No, that's exactly what because I'm like, if it shows us homocysteine is high, it doesn't tell us why.
Exactly. So now, but it did give me enough guidance to say, I already knew what testing I'd done on myself in the past. And I was like, do I need to retest those or is it new testing I haven't done? And that gave me enough insight with high histamine. I thought I want to do another HTMA. I want to get a new fresh insight into my mineral levels, including copper, because copper can impact histamine. I want to look at my food. So I did a couple food sensitivity tests, tests on foods I hadn't tested yet, like corn and rice, which I ended up coming back really high. So I'm on a grain-free diet, massively changed my life.
Huge.
And then on that second HTMA, I did find I would consider a small amount of copper toxicity. I didn't look at it and be like, yeah, it's not there at all. But it also wasn't like a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio when I'm evaluating it. And again, I know you're doing your blood work analysis, but I did a copper protocol. And I'm making these other changes as well because I don't think it was just about the copper. And I go to a conference, for a business conference, and I'm in this business conference and I'm like, my back is hurting so bad. It's never hurt. Like, it does not hurt this bad ever. And I'm like, I'm not sitting more than normal. There's nothing, I didn't get on a long airplane. I don't have back pain. It's just, that's just not a normal Allison symptom. And I decide, I'm like doing some palpation on myself. And I'm like, it's my freaking kidneys, right? And so my theory is that I was starting to copper dump and that my kidneys were doing a lot of work and that I was getting pain from my kidneys. And about 3 days later, it just subsided. I had some weird smelling urine for a bit and then it got better. And maybe it was something else, but my big theory is that it was a little bit of a copper dump.
Huge.
I mean, for you, huge. So I would say,
as soon as I said kidneys, I was like, oh my God, totally makes sense.
It's all clicking.
Well, yes.
And so I'm so glad you say that too, because when I tell other people, like my dad, who's a physician, he's a surgeon specifically. He's like, could have been a kidney stone. How do you? I'm like, but I was doing a copper protocol. It didn't just like happen at any time. Like,
This is where the intuition comes in. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to listening to your body. I think sometimes people on the conventional side, I don't want to say like they're just so taught that the body does this and this is what you do versus the inner wisdom of the body. And again, one of my mentors, she's like, because I'm like, I need to do more research. I need to spend more time reading more papers. And she's like, no, you don't. I find what I see in practice, I then go find research to support it. And it's like, what? Give me a second to digest that. You find in clinical practice what you're seeing and how the body is working and how it's responding. And then you're going out and finding research to support it, not the other way
And that's what
around.
people actually have done for up until like only the last 100 years, when research has really skyrocketed. And well, there's a lot of reasons for that research skyrocketing the way it has. I would blame pharmaceuticals a lot, but prior to these last 100 years, where we've just been able to, even just the technological advances, to really get so specific in our research, which is beautiful. But prior to that, it was clinical observation. It was, I observed this thing, and then you have to like literally wait for your patient to die and then do a biopsy and be like, right? I know, I'm just being like honest. Like they have to.
I know. It's hilarious though. When you say it out loud, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how is this a process? Wait till they die and then we'll find out.
But that's just because they didn't have any way to look into the body. But all that being said, they had to look clinically at what made sense. I even wonder, I don't do any Chinese medicine, but TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, has
Huge.
It's always impressive to me as a non-practitioner, but how often it correlates with exactly what I find as a non-practitioner of it. When my friends who do TCM, who are acupuncturists or herbalists, they will find the same thing. And I bet those Chinese doctors from thousands of years ago were just so clinically attuned, right?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. It just gave me permission to be like, okay, I need to understand the physiology. I need to understand the biochemistry. I need to understand how these pieces work together. Like, copper. I don't remember learning about that in school. But now it's like, oh, it turns out copper is over here and it's over here. I do remember this little mineral on the electric transport chain that shows up. And then it like starts to just click, right? And then it adds it all in. And so I think it just gave me more permission to, hey, obviously I do everything on myself before I recommend for my patients. Obviously, like not all treatments I can do on myself, because if I don't have endometriosis, but if I'm doing a protocol to clear the uterine lining, I can do that for myself too. It just is going to feel a little bit different, but then I can walk people through it. So yeah, it's powerful. It's trusting the gut, it's knowing and following along. Where back to the kidneys, to me, it's like when my body is flaring, before I used to get scared, now I get excited because I'm like, ooh, my body's talking to me. What is it trying to tell me? Every time I get sick, every time there's a rash, every time there's anything, I'm like, this is exciting because it's coming out.
Yes.
Right? The bug has to express itself. The toxin has to express itself in order to get out. And then I visualize everything that I'm doing is rebuilding those cells. So that now that place it's taken anymore. You don't have room for it. You don't have room for this parasite because there's really good bugs in that place now. But the expression of that might not feel very good. I might be more agitated. I might not feel like myself. I might have a hard time sleeping. I might be pooping out something weird, all that kind of stuff. But if I welcome it with this energy of like, it's coming out so I can rebuild it, I think, it makes a big difference.
And this would be like a great, I think, worth its own podcast episode in many ways to digest. But just to tell people, we're only about to scratch the surface of this concept. But you've said multiple times now in the podcast, curiosity. This curiosity, whether it's not going to research and getting too brainy and heady. And I think some people are blessed with that. Like they just love it. That's actually energizing for them. But sometimes it can slow you up where you feel you're waiting for permission.
I'm not that person. I've always known that. I was like, but I need to become that person. And then like, I'm so glad my mentor taught me, because I have colleagues who freaking love it. They can just sit in research for days. And I'm like, I will poke my eyes out. Like I want to be in front of the people,
but you've said curiosity. And I find that the difference, something really powerful. If someone's really sick and they're listening to this, I'm often encouraging my clients, and it's not easy. I'm not going to say that it's going to be easy for me to say, hard to do, but being able to shift from essentially panic when a symptom happens. And that's kind of the extreme. Maybe it's not like a panic attack, but it's this like, coming, Dr. Jane, my headaches are worse, or I had another month where I didn't get pregnant, or because there's so many emotions wrapped up when you're sick. I can remember 2015 being my sickest, losing my hair, telling my hairstylist, is my hair falling out? And she's like, no. Right?
Yeah.
You're lying to me.
Yeah.
The truth is not in you.
We have these wigs that are available for purchase.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious. No, but how can you be curious when you feel like your world is falling apart? Yeah. However, I'd say it's going to start small. But if you can shift it to a little bit of, this is interesting that I didn't have this symptom yesterday and I do it today. First off, you don't get all the panic hormones, aka fight and flight, yep. aka cortisol, etc., adrenaline. But additionally, you become more friends. You don't feel like your body's an enemy. And I think that really is what happens when you have these long-term healers, where we're at peace with where we currently are at, even with its imperfections. Maybe it's the wrinkly skin. Maybe it's the random rash we get on our shoulder. Maybe it's the congestion we haven't quite figured out. Whatever it is, and we're aware of it, but it doesn't make us think black and white, like I'm so sick, or I haven't done anything, or gosh, I still have all these things to work on, even with all the work I've done or money I've spent. We see it really differently. And I think it brings a gentleness to the process that we're all inherently craving. So I know that wasn't the topic, but I heard you say it several times. And sometimes I just think, sometimes we're listening to podcasts and we're listening for what are the exact steps I should do, Dr. Jane or Allison, we're looking for that hardcore, what's the research? And maybe it's the gentleness you walk away with, or the intuition, or the things that we've
a little bit more
today.
grace through the process. And
yeah,
totally. No, thank you. It's just I love from the get-go when you're explaining your process, it wasn't one thing that fixed it. And I think if people can walk away with that, there isn't one thing that will fix it. But I just actually reposted this on my social media yesterday. When the flower isn't blooming, you're not blaming the flower. You're not going, oh, stupid flower, why aren't you blooming? You're probably going to check the soil, the hydration levels. You're going to look at the lighting. You're going to make sure it's in the right spot. And so for fertility, especially, I'm like, you are the flower and you will bloom. But if you're not blooming, don't blame yourself. Look at your environment and what's causing it. And not just the environment you're current, it's also addressing the past. I have a client with, I don't know if she has premature ovarian failure, PCOS, I can't remember now, but she has so many hormonal issues. Mm-hmm. And we look at her upbringing. It's her mom smoked when she was pregnant with her. Her mom smoked the entire time from 0 to 18 until she lived and got out. It's do you think that you would have a different genetic predisposition, if you will, or you would have a different leg up if that wasn't the case? It's that's just a shit hand. And pardon my French, but that sucks, and now you have to, that's the healing generational disease. Work. Yeah. You have to do extra work
that somebody else doesn't have to do.
Exactly. And that is what healing generational disease is, and it's not going to be one easy thing, but it's absolutely possible. And there's your own version of what it feels like to feel happy, confident, and fulfilled. You might not go to the Olympics, but maybe that's not what you want to do anyways.
Just want to get pregnant.
Yeah, well, that's it. Exactly. But it's some people, everybody has different goals, and it's just know what's right for you and learn to live in your body and heal your traumas, as opposed to comparing yourself to literally anybody else. Because it's we just have no idea.
Yeah, well, so-and-so only had to do blah, blah, blah to get pregnant.
You have no idea. You have no idea what they've got. And now having my own kids, I'm the amount of intention that I put into them and how much work. And it's I know that hard work will pay off because some things will be really easy for them. Yeah. But I will remind them, and I remind people all the time, that it wasn't easy. It was intentional. So then they can do something else with that. So then they don't have to deal with the asthmas and the digestion issues and the hormonal issues. They can just figure out who they are in the world and do their thing instead of worrying about their health. It's that's not easy. That's so much work for me now, but I know I'm making that sacrifice because I know what I'm trying to build, And
I think another missing link, or another maybe layer to this, is that what you're describing is super honorable, super powerful, takes a lot of effort on the healer. So that maybe this woman who the mother did not have the resources to stop smoking. She's having to pick up that labor of not physical, not like baby labor, but like hard work labor of redoing that. But interestingly enough, in society, if you do that on a financial level, you are treated like, oh, I'm the first person to go to college in my family. I'm the first person to
100%.
be out of debt. I'm the first person to become a millionaire. I'm whatever it is. I retired at 40. Like anything that's a financial story of rerouting something that has not been true in your family is usually like, oh, you're such a boss. You like, you're amazing. But if you're like, I'm trying to heal myself, people are like, you're weird. You're crunchy. You're like overly sensitive. I hate the overly sensitive one. Can I like
that's
punch
it.
someone for that?
That's such a good parallel, Allison. I love it because it's true. And I can, it's amazing when someone makes it to college when they came out of nothing and but like, why can't we do that for health as well? Because it is like the example that I gave, like that's a battle that nobody knows about. And they should, because there's a bunch of other people who are also going through that.
Yes.
Even like the kids with obesity, if you think about that, I'm like, I've seen kids with like full on bottles of Coke at 2 years old. You think like, right? Like that's harsh. Those kids are going to have to do a lot of work if they can even get there.
Yeah. So, I mean, all that to say, whoever's listening, like if you need that, take that with you. That's like yours to say, own that, right? What you're doing, the work you're doing is admirable. And maybe not a lot of people are going to say that. Maybe
they don't understand you, but do you need them to understand you?
Yeah. And it is sad. Like at the end of the day, there are a few illnesses you get treated for a warrior for addressing. Cancer being a big one.
Huge.
And I remember being pissed for a long time. If I just had cancer, I'd have a little bit more compassion. If I just had cancer, I'd get a little bit more friends being like, oh, you're in pain? Oh, my goodness. Can I bring you some food? Now, of course, you're like, if you have a GI issue, you're like, no, actually, food's not the best. But,
yeah.
But that being said, it's a little unfair in health that it's not built into our society to have, to believe people, to have compassion. There's just suspicion of like.
Well, even infertility, right? Like most people have no idea. And it's like, that would be one of the best things. Like if someone shows up at your door and says, hey, can we just hang out, eat some chips, drink some kombucha and play a game or something when you're struggling with infertility instead of being invited to another
baby shower.
Yeah. Like it would be amazing. Right.
Yeah. So
one step at a time.
We can't change society, but we can give grace to ourselves. And you can receive it from Dr. Jane and I. We give it to you.
Slowly though. Like, no, that's why I love Connected, because I think it is slowly infiltrating and it just takes time. It just takes time to get to the places. Okay. Before I let you go, I do want to know, what did you take for the copper to help get the copper out of your body?
Yeah. So my copper protocol, sometimes I forget protocol stuff. Like I'm going to just go I actually pulled up my copper protocol just in case I had to like, you don't want to like
reference it.
Something. Yeah. So my first part of my copper protocol for anybody is basic minerals. I call them the big four. I don't know if your training ever refers to them these ways: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. I was particularly deficient in potassium and sodium, fairly common with a lot of issues with mineral imbalance. And then partly also because they're regulated by the adrenal glands. We're back there with ceruloplasmin, and now potassium and sodium regulated by aldosterone. So I always start there, like high dosing, minimum 1,000. 1,000 can be high though for people. Like, so sometimes it's even less than that. I'd already been dosing magnesium and sodium.
Calcium, magnesium, and then potassium and
sodium. I'd already been high dosing it, like 1,000 milligrams at least once a day. So then I doubled it, 2,000 milligrams. Again, mostly just like Himalayan pink salt, which I know some people give it bad rap, but I've found it's been fine for my clients. And then like cream of tartar. Honestly, I use a lot of cream of tartar because I just don't always want to eat like high potassium foods, even though I know it absorbs really well. And that was my first thing. That was when I got my copper dumping. And then after that, it's molybdenum, some type of something to help bile release. So sometimes it's been bitters. Sometimes it's been like basically
Tutka. Have you used Tutka?
I haven't relied on Tutka a lot. I know some people like love it. I don't dislike it, but I just like, why do you hate it?
No, I love it.
Oh, you love it. Okay,
favorite.
Sorry.
No, I love it. Cellcore Advanced Tutka. My body's like, give it to me.
Yeah. I think I was just doing bitters. And then
bitters are great too.
Yeah. But by the time I got to the molybdenum and zeolite, it was really when I started high dosing my potassium and sodium. And then I was doing coffee enemas with the push catch kit from Quicksilver Scientific. Really like that push catch kit. It's a bit of a pain, but when you're just like focusing on
Yep.
certain type of detox, I find it's just phenomenal.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. I'm always curious. I mean, that makes sense why the kidneys with the sodium and the potassium on the higher dose.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I see how this was going to happen. I also would have been taking zinc at the time. Zinc
sure.
is,
Yeah, I'm sure.
for me, already a part of another protocol. So it's almost not really in the copper protocol because it's assumed that you're going to be taking zinc before you get there, right? You basically want your body to naturally be getting rid of copper as much as possible before you then start pushing it with
Totally.
bigger factors like molybdenum, which is going to start really shaking things up. But yeah, I'd say it's amazing how I literally had a client start this protocol recently, and she'd already been doing sodium, potassium, but started adding in the molybdenum, zeolite, the push catch, and the bile support, additional bile support. And she had the gnarliest period. She's like, I was so angry at my kids and just like, it was painful. And is this because of that copper dumping syndrome?
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
like, probably.
Just some detoxing. Yeah. I find when people are detoxing like that, it's because you've had that there just at a lower dosage. And now we just like magnified it because there was nothing there. You wouldn't have those symptoms.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And I always tell them, just wait till next period. If it gets better, you probably passed your height. At least unless we double your dosage or something to try and speed something
Sure.
up. But the height of your detoxing, if it gets worse, we're still climbing the ladder. The period pain and discomfort is a fascinating component during a copper
sure.
detox.
I do find that, I mean, in general, I kind of say like, hey, the period is just going to be all over the place for the next little bit, meaning like it might still be 28 days or 26 days, but you might get a really light period or might get really heavy or clotty or whatever.
Yeah.
We're changing a lot. Things are just going to change and that's okay. It's just data. Exactly. How high on zinc do you go? Just curious.
I will bring in research here because I've been really curious what like absorption rate of zinc is. Some people say you can't really do more than 15 milligrams at a time. So and I actually came across this when I was, side note, was learning and building out a protocol for P-roll disorder where you're chronically losing zinc and B6. And a lot of people say be 15 milligrams like morning and night. I will generally be between 15 and then or 30 once a day. And I find that I get similar results. So like, again, I take the research lightly where I'm not like mega like there's no reason for me to get up to like 100 or anything. Like nothing's gonna, like I've never had any reason to think anything different's gonna happen at that. So I'm in the 15 or 30, 15 twice a day or 30 once.
I have gotten higher now.
Yeah.
Again, with like Leah, because
Yeah.
there's like when you start looking at genetics and seeing their SNPs, methylation, and where they need it.
Yes.
So 100 milligrams, I have gone up.
You've
in
done
like
that?
my
Okay.
yeah.
But usually maybe
You have to
often
know
when there's
there-
like another SNP. Yeah.
You can look at SNPs, you can look at genetics, you can look at just methylation and where
Exactly.
I think you can just
Where they're kind of clogging.
exactly where they're clogging in the cycle. And then just based on what they need, you know, like if they have a lot of infections and they have like, I really like the True Cellular Zinc 7, I think. Like my body feels very different when it's on it versus anything else. I just feel like I'm absorbing it. And I've gone up in really high doses and I just like feel better. And it depends, you know, on the person. Some people need to be on high doses for a while others don't. You just test, right? You test and see. But that's something, again, I just learned from my mentor and I started to have a bit more confidence to play with it. And then, of course, you meet the patient who needs the higher dose because it's like the 15 or
you
the...
like learn it.
Well, that's it. Yeah. You're like, oh my God, you're this person that like 30 milligrams is doing nothing for you. But as soon as I doubled that, they're like, yep, I'm not getting sick anymore. All of a sudden, I started passing parasites all of a sudden because now you need the energy, right, to overcome the pathogen. And so if the body doesn't have the energy, it just kind of lingers. And I find when I give the body the boost, then all of a sudden all the pathogens can come out.
That is because I've had the mineral I've had better experience just like going crazy with dosing is molybdenum. If I'm going to, and again, now I'm like, ooh, how can I play with the zinc?
Totally,
but I've done molybdenum a lot more, mainly because of exposure that I've had with
molybdenum is also important for the methylation. In the methylation, it's one of the first, the SAHI to SAMI, or the SAMI to SAHI, that transition when it gets locked. Molybdenum is really important in there as well. And sulfur.
And
Huge.
sulfur metabolism. So with people who are having sulfur sensitivity, which I find I'm usually not getting full blown cases, but I'll see like, I bet sulfur is a part, like something with that is a part of what's going
And then like
on.
histamine is going to be a thing there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then we'll dump them. Well, and molybdenum is super supportive. It's usually not going to make them detox like crazy if there's some of that going on with the sulfur. So I'm usually like doubling, tripling, quadrupling molybdenum as like my play mineral, but now I'm like curious what zinc's gonna do.
I know. I'm gonna play with the molybdenum and you play with the zinc. And we will report back. Thank you so much for being here, Allison. Is there anything else that we didn't mention that the listeners need to know?
I mean, if they want to come hang out with me, can I share that?
Please, yeah. Where can we find you?
If they want to come and hang out and learn more about anything that we talk about, so you're gonna go to Better Belly Podcast is my podcast. It's a top 1% global podcast. And then also just to have like a free tool and resource for people if they want any more information, which is just go to betterbellytherapies.com/training. And it just is like a free little training that I've found can elucidate people in their minds of why, if they haven't gotten better, why they haven't. And honestly, they might find that it sounds similar to today because, as you already mentioned, Dr. Jane, it's like it's not about the one thing, but I talk about something called the 5 toxin trap. So it might just be another chink for them to be thinking about.
Yeah,
betterbellytherapies.com/training.
Yeah, and Better Belly Therapies on Instagram.
Yeah. Thanks.
I love, like, Instagram is how I connect with all my people. And then obviously getting them to the podcast is great because then you can hear a bit more of the conversation. But thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.